In this episode, see a legendary vegetable garden that time forgot, learn hassle-free ways to store a generator, learn how to remove white deck haze, and see my favorite pole saw in action, plus more. Well, this question comes from Joanne. Good afternoon, Steve. Back in the spring, I set the wheels in motion to purchase a generator. I live in Ottawa and have been faced with all sorts of storms in the last months. I live alone and have seen 70 plus years go by. Can my generator be stored outside along the back of the house in summer and winter if covered by a tarp or, if necessary, a small shed-like structure, perhaps like those used to disguise garbage cans? I'm sure I won't be able to schlep this beast by myself, especially in winter. Well, the good news for Joanne and anyone else with a generator to deal with like this is that yes, you don't have to keep it in a garage or a tool shed that's a long way from where you need to connect it to the house. You can store generators close to where they're going to be used. I've seen some people use tarps, but I don't really recommend that. They tend to hold moisture around. If any moisture leaks in from a rain or even wicking up from the ground, it can get too humid in there. And also, since the tarp covers the generator tightly, it's a wonderful spot for mice to build nests, and when mice build nests, there's problems. There's smell, nesting material. They love to chew on things. So I would strongly recommend a small little structure, like a little shed. If you Google generator shed, there's all kinds of ideas that come up for building your own. There's also purchased products as well. The thing that makes a little enclosure a generator shed is that the roof and usually the front walls can hinge out of the way, because you can't have your generator sitting in a completely closed box while it's operating. You need to be able to open it up. Another big benefit of the generator shed is that when it's open, the generator can still be sheltered from rain and snow and all kinds of nastiness like that, which is usually present when a power failure happens. So you can't have a generator sitting outside in the rain and operating properly or safely. So generator shed, perfect option. Lots of people have them. I'm constantly amazed at how many people are getting generators and they need to deal with problems like this. So there you go, Joanne, you're all set. Next question comes from Carolyn. Hi, Steve. You recommended a membrane over 2x4 roof boards, then install foam insulation, sheathing, and other membrane material above the sheathing and under the shingles. Now, she's taking my small cabin course, my cozy cabin course, and that's what she's talking about here. So we're talking about insulation that sits on top of the roof, not in an attic or underneath the rafters or anything, because the idea with this cabin design is that you can see the rafters, you can see the roof boards. It's a nice, authentic cabin effect. So she's wondering about the roofing membrane that goes on top of the insulation and underneath the shingles. And I think it should be waterproof, yes, but vapor permeable to prevent trapping moisture in the sheathing and the insulation. So by vapor permeable, she means that water vapor can escape through the membrane. The very best house wraps are made this way. So they shed liquid water, but if by some chance, and it's a pretty good chance actually, eventually water might get behind, with conventional building wraps and membranes, that water can't get out. So it's held there against whatever wood is underneath of it, and it promotes rot and all kinds of nastiness. So permeable in this case means it can dry. Now, the thing is, in the case of this situation where we've got insulation, foam insulation, some more sheathing, and then on top some shingles or steel roof or something like that, there's really no advantage to going with the permeable in that case, because everything above it and below it is impervious. It has to be. I mean, shingles, you can't get a vapor permeable shingle. The kind of insulation I like to use, the foam insulation that I recommend in the course, is vapor impermeable as well. So there's no real advantage in this case, and you can just go ahead. What I like to use in this situation isn't just a building wrap or something like that, but it's actual ice and water shield, which is thick, self-sticking. It basically makes your roof waterproof before the shingles or the metal roof goes on at all. That's kind of my rule of thumb. No roof should rely only on the outer layer for waterproofness. You really do need to make it waterproof first, because you never know when that roof's going to, those shingles or metal roof are going to be torn off or damaged or something. You don't want to be open to the elements that way. So a good, strong, standalone membrane under those shingles are the way to go in that case. Now Frank writes, "Hi Steve, I love your blog, so informative." Thank you, Frank. "I'm writing to see if you can do an article on indoor residential elevators. I live in a split-level house in Southborough, Massachusetts. As a 77-year-old, I have been senior-proofing my home for years. I have thought if I ever needed to live in a place with one floor, it would be far less expensive to install an elevator than to sell my home. Heck, the cost of a realtor's commission alone would more than pay for an elevator, I think. Any thoughts?" Well, Frank's absolutely right, and he's exceptionally wise too. Very few people that I know want to move into a nursing home when they get older. Who would? Who wouldn't want to stay in their own home? But Frank is taking steps to make sure that he can stay in his own home as long as possible, and maybe for the duration. So he's exceptionally wise to start that. And I'd also agree with his take that an indoor elevator is the way to go. Products of this sort are exploding, really, as the population ages and people want to take care of themselves in their own home. Governments are even encouraging people to renovate their homes now, encouraging them with words and with money too, because the regular nursing home approach is very expensive. When you take away all the subsidies that some places offer for this sort of thing, you're looking at maybe $100,000 a year just to stay in a nursing home. Now, some people pay less, but they're not actually paying the full cost. The full cost to society is about $100,000 a year for a modern nursing home in the Western world, and that's a lot of money. It really does add up, especially considering that most people spend an average of 5 years in a nursing home. So when it comes to interior elevators, there are a couple of suggestions. First, you want to explore the local commercial landscape and see who is in the business of doing this. There are lots of outfits that are in the business of dealing with residential elevators. One of the most common types is what's called a porch lift, which is a great alternative to a wheelchair ramp when you don't have enough room. It probably costs less for an outdoor porch lift than it would cost to build, say, a proper ramp from wood. There's a lot of wood in a ramp. There's foundation work to do, all kinds of things. So we've got the outdoor porch lifts, which are kind of like an open elevator. There's a big door, you roll in there, you close the door, you hit a button, and it goes up the 2 or 3 or 5 feet or whatever it needs to get onto your porch, or some sort of a landing so you can go in your house. Now what Frank is asking about is an indoor residential elevator, which are similar. They're more expensive because they're more involved, but they serve the same purpose in that they basically make the whole house one level. And there are specialist companies that offer that, usually the same companies that offer the outdoor porch lifts. Now there is another option that Frank and other people might want to consider, and that's a stair lift. And these can be installed on most any kind of interior stair. It involves the installation of a rail, quite a strong rail on the side of the stairwell opening, and there's a seat on there, and it's electrically operated, so you hit a button and it kind of takes you up or takes you down, and that is much less expensive and intrusive to install than an indoor residential elevator, just because there's so much less to do. With the elevator option, you have to take up some floor space. You've got to completely redo the framing, and then you have to have the equipment installed, whereas with the stair lift, it's just something that fastens to your stair. And in fact, if the time comes that the house, you don't need the house anymore, or it's going to be bought by someone else, then that lift can be taken off, the stair lift. So 2 options to consider. Carrie asks, I have a 20-year-old Eon deck that has been very good over the years. Now, Eon is a brand, one of the earlier brands of composite decking material. So non-wood, the idea is you don't have to finish it. But at this point, it seems to have lost its surface gloss. We regularly clean the deck with water, then squeegee the excess off, and towel dry it to remove any lingering dirt. So you can see Carrie takes really good care of her deck. This has worked for years, but now the deck looks hazy and whitish when dry. What can we do to restore the original beauty? Well, I've run into this myself with my own deck. I have a Trex composite deck at my place, and it's dark brown, and it's beautiful, rich color. Really love it. Wash it maybe a couple of times a year. But over the last few years, I've noticed that even though it looks great when it's wet, after scrubbing and lots of water rinsing and everything, it looks kind of hazy. So as it turns out, the cause of this is mineral buildup on that plastic. Now in my case, and perhaps in Carrie's case, the minerals come from two sources. One is just the natural dirt that blows onto a deck, especially any dirt that has a lot of calcium in it. Cement dust is really bad for this. Not that that's very common, but dust can settle on there and it can bond to the surface, and it becomes pretty insoluble, which is the root of the problem. It builds slowly. Over time it gets duller and duller and whiter and whiter. So you need to apply something to dissolve those minerals. Now when I first ran into this problem, I thought, well, how about some vinegar? Good strong 7% pickling vinegar. That should eat off the minerals no problem. Put some on, let it sit for half an hour, washed it off, let it dry. There was some improvement, but not a whole lot of improvement. So long and the short of it is, there are products out there that are meant for dissolving minerals, so calcium, rust, things like that. And there are two that I know of. One is called CLR. It's kind of been around a long time. And there's another one called Crud Cutter. It's a mineral remover. And what I have found works spectacularly well is you take a product like this mineral dissolving product, you dilute it with water about 50-50, then you just slosh it on the surface. I actually use the same brush that I would use to wash the deck, which is one of those long-handled car washing brushes where you can put a garden hose on it, so you get the soft bristles, and then if you want the water flowing out as well as you scrub with these soft bristles. So without water flowing, I just dip it in this tub with a diluted liquid in it, slosh it on the surface, make sure it's generously covered, leave it for maybe an hour. In that time, depending on the weather, the stuff could have dried or partially dried, but that doesn't seem to matter. Just let it sit there, let it do its job, and then go back and rinse. And you want to rinse with a lot of water because it's the rinsing that's going to get those dissolved, and there's now dissolved minerals off the deck. But Carrie has done something else here, which is pretty important if you have hard water, which we do here, and that's not to let the water lay on the deck after you've rinsed it, because that water has minerals in it too, probably very similar to the minerals that you got rid of with the solution. So squeegeeing is good. I've never gotten on my hands and knees to dry my deck with a towel or anything, but what I find works very well and quite quickly too is a large leaf blower. It moves a lot of air and it blows the water off, and actually you can even see the water drying where this thing is blowing off the water. So you do those two things. You dissolve the minerals, rinse the deck thoroughly, blow it off or squeegee it off, and it's worked well for me in different situations. I think it'll work well for Carrie and maybe for you too. Now in the next section of Practical Living, I want to take you to a very special little garden spot. It's on a property that my son-in-law and daughter have just bought. It's right around the corner from us, so we're pretty happy that they're there with all their kids too. But in this local history book, there's mention of the specific property that they bought. And part of the description includes mention of this legendary garden plot, which probably hasn't been cultivated for 50 or 60 years. but it's supposed to be a really spectacular piece of ground for gardening. The book doesn't say where it is, but I think, well, I'm almost certain we've discovered where it is. And I want to take you there now. And I think you're going to be amazed at the massive natural growth that has occurred there. A good sign if you want to grow a vegetable garden. But also there's something else we found too that's, well, it was a real bonus to find. So let's go take a look. Well, less than a month ago, my son-in-law and daughter and their family bought the place you see here. It's an 88-acre farm on Manitoulin Island, 30 acres cleared. The barn could use some work. We're talking about that, and you may see some more about that in the future, but the house is pretty new, and it's just a wonderful piece of land. And it's described in this local history book. Now, I never had any reason to pay attention to this piece of property and its entry in this book, but after they bought it, I paid close attention, and I found something very interesting. I won't read everything to you, but listen to this section. They first cleared the trees and sold firewood. That's referring to Lorne and Alma Baker. They're the first people to actually clear land and farm here, and that was in 1934 that they built the house, so pretty recently, really. Then they burned off the land, and the deep soil below the bluff would burn a long time. But afterwards, it proved to be excellent gardening soil, and you could almost see everything growing. They grew and processed huge amounts of vegetables, selling some whenever possible. So that got me curious. Where is this legendary patch of gardening soil? What does it look like? All we know for sure is that it's the bottom of a bluff. Well, there's a couple of places on the property that meet that description, but I have found something that I've never seen before in all my time. It's at the bottom of a bluff, it's near the house, and I think this is the legendary garden spot. But something that my son-in-law discovered really clinches it for me. So let's drive down, I'll show you the spot, and then I'll show you this interesting old finding too. So if this is the legendary garden spot, it hasn't been cultivated for at least 50 years. There's a lot of overgrowth here. I can't go any further because there's a log, so let's head out on foot. I think it might be that way. So I've noticed other areas on this property grow really well, better than I'm used to seeing around here, and not necessarily because it's gotten any care or fertilizer. So if you can see through the trees, that's a limestone bluff, not hugely tall, 20-something feet maybe. The house is up top. And then we come to this clearing, which, by the way, you can't see on Google Earth too. That's how I first spotted it. But now, no doubt this area has grown in. There's some small stuff around here. If we're going to use it for a garden, we're going to have to bring it back to its former condition. But take a look at how tall these plants are. If nothing else, certainly is a fertile little piece of ground here. I mean, how tall is that? How tall are these? 7 feet maybe? I've seen plants like this before, but never ever this big. As you can see, if you look around, it's about the size of what you'd want for a big family garden. As I said, it's grown in some, but this is, I think, where it's at. And let's just take a look at the soil here. Scratch it a bit. It's fairly light, which is great for hoeing and things. So this sure looks like the spot to me. And we're going to try to grow something here. We're going to cut this stuff down, prune back some trees, and just see how it will grow. There's two challenges we're going to face though. One is deer, white-tailed deer. There are a lot of them around here. A lot more than there were 70, 80, 90 years ago when this was cultivated. People had to hunt deer a lot more. They hunted them out of season because it was either that or starvation up here in Manitoulin. So far more deer. We may have to set up an electric fence to deter them. And as my cameraman Robert would tell you if he could talk on this camera, there's a lot of mosquitoes down here too, which is to be expected. I think maybe they're going to clear off a bit when we get it trimmed off. But there's another thing I want to show you, and it's something that my son-in-law Paul discovered, and this for me clinches it as this being the spot for that little garden where you could almost see everything grow. So let me go and we'll find this little thing right now. So this is that limestone bluff. It's not terribly tall, but it does fit the description. The mystery garden is over there, and just down here is something you don't see very often. There it is. It's a hand-dug water well. Kind of dangerous. It's not covered in any way. Water is about, could be 10 feet down. This is the pumping chamber and pipe for a hand pump that must have been in there, pulled out for some reason. We'll get a cover on this, but if you wanted to have a garden, you'd need to have some water for dry years. I think they built this well in order to service that garden. Pumping water by hand in buckets and carrying it over. People were used to working a lot harder back then than we are now, but isn't this interesting? I did notice too that it's just barely big enough to dig in, because with these hand-dug wells, you got to dig your way down. So someone had to be down there digging out, and I don't think it could possibly be any smaller than it is now and still work, but an interesting little finding, something the kids didn't know when they were choosing this property, but I'll show you more about this later as we develop this over the months and years, and also show you how that garden grows. One of the reasons I think it may be, this whole area actually may be more fertile than the surrounding areas is because, and I haven't seen it in the spring yet, but judging by the lay of the land, I think there's probably quite a little spring runoff here, bringing nutrients as it goes. It doesn't seem particularly wet, but we'll get a melt of snow with some rain. We probably get some nutrients washing in here. Probably has been happening for zillions of years. Maybe that's why it's so growthy out there. Also, it's quite sheltered. None of the plants are going to get bothered by wind or extremes like that. So, an interesting little spot and an interesting little corner of the world. Well, for 2 or 3 years now I've been using this Milwaukee fuel pole saw, and it's fabulous. For years before I've used a gas-powered pole saw. It works great, and I do generally prefer gas-powered outdoor power tools rather than electric, but electric really wins in this case because first of all you don't need much power, you're only trimming branches. But also with a pole saw, when you're using it, you're putting it down, you're moving some branches away, you make another cut, you put it down. So there's a lot of stopping and starting, which is kind of a pain when you got to pull a pull cord to get things going. So I am well and truly experienced with this saw, and I see almost no flaws in it at all. It's very handy. I use it mostly for trimming branches around the edges of my pasture fields, but I also use it for trimming the ornamental trees around the house. Gives you good reach. Like all chainsaw type electric power tools, this one has a reservoir with oil in it. You have to keep oil in that, and it's easy to forget because you never run out of gasoline, which is usually the indication you need to put in more chain oil if you're using a gas-powered saw too. But I'll just show you a few cuts here. It uses Milwaukee's M18 battery platform, 18 volts, and I got a big 12 amp hour battery on here. I can cut all day with this. I mean, not constant cuts, but I can trim branches all day with that, and it doesn't run out. So 2 speeds. That's a bit of a gimmick though, because why would you want to go slow? I mean, the fast speed is just about perfect for all cutting, so I never tamper with that at all. But I've got a few branches here, so let's just see it in action. So this pole saw has become a mainstay tool for me. I use it a lot. It has never let me down. Was a little suspicious here. Just the one nut holding the, well, that chain needs to be tightened. Just the one nut holding the bar in place. I kind of would like to see that a little beefier, maybe 2, like on a typical chainsaw, but I haven't had any trouble with it. And if you're looking for a better way to trim branches, I certainly can recommend this Milwaukee pole saw. In this video, I want to talk to you about luxury vinyl flooring, why I like it, and what to look out for if you're considering it for your own home. Now, this is a couple of scraps from a job I was involved with, and right away you can see one of the advantages of what they generically called luxury vinyl flooring. This is actually luxury vinyl plank. The original pieces were about this long. These are just some scraps. Generically, there's another term called luxury vinyl tile, which is the same sort of thing, but it's just square. So it's just a shape issue. But you see how it's flexible? That's a really big advantage because many subfloors aren't all that flat. They're certainly not flat enough for laminates, which require no more than 1/4 of an inch of deviation from perfectly flat in a 10-foot radius. Now that's a pretty tall order. There are ways of flattening an existing floor. Some are more troublesome than others, but wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to worry about flattening at all? And that's where the flexibility comes in. Another thing I really like about luxury vinyl is how tough it is. I've seen it in commercial situations, open to the public, outdoor shoes on all the time in all weather, and it's gone for years with no change in appearance. I'm going to be doing a little torture test comparison later on in this video, where I'm going to take a piece of finished wood, 3 coats of the toughest urethane I know, and I'm going to compare the toughness of urethane finished wood with luxury vinyl plank. Another thing I like about this type of flooring is something that's just come up recently. The original versions of all kinds of luxury vinyl flooring, that would be plank and tile, used to click together. So it was a free-floating floor, pieces clicked together, they held together, and that was the standard for a long time. There's 2 problems with that though. The biggest problem is if you do get damage, and any flooring can be damaged, if you do get a piece damaged in, say, the middle of the room, and it's a click-together installation, you can't just take that piece out because it's interlocked with its neighbors. So you need to remove, unclick, pile up somewhere else all the flooring leading up to that damaged spot, and then take the damaged one out, put a fresh one in, and then replace all the flooring again. Not so with something like this. And if you take a look, the edges are they're just square. So you might think, well, how does it fasten down? How does it stop from moving around? This particular type of luxury vinyl is best installed with a kind of pressure-sensitive adhesive. The stuff we used here comes in a big tub. You roll it on to the subfloor with a roller after that subfloor is nice and clean, and it creates a surface that's sticky enough to hold the flooring down, but not so sticky that you can't pull a piece up if you want to for repairs. It's a system that works well. I've tried this pulling up business, and it couldn't be better. It's firmly in place, but you get a sharp tool around an edge, you start to pull it up, it peels off, and in fact the remaining flooring is actually still sticky, so you can even put the new piece down on top. Another reason I like this better than click style is because sometimes if the interface between the interlocking click parts doesn't offer enough friction, those parts can move apart. End to end, they can slide apart under foot traffic, the movement from walking on it, vibrations, things like that. And then that's a problem, because if you want to fix that, well, you've got to somehow jam the flooring back together again, but not before you put a little glue on the end tongue that came apart. It's a pain, and it's always best to avoid pains when you can. So that issue is completely solved by this style of flooring. Now, there are different thicknesses and different types, and I'm not saying that all luxury vinyl flooring is as tough as what you'll see here, but most of the stuff I've seen is. And it's and toughness is an excellent quality when you want a wood look floor. Now, I say wood look, this isn't wood. This is made from a photograph of wood, and it's quite authentic. I mean, I'm a woodworker, I know wood. If I was looking at that floor, I wouldn't be able to tell that it's not real wood. And to be honest, I do like the authenticity of real wood, but not so much that I want to have that hardwood floor sanded and refinished every 4, 5, 6 years, maybe even more often if you've got a lot of traffic in your house, dogs with claws, things like that. One other thing that's easy to like about luxury vinyl is how it's cut when it's installed. Regular hardwood flooring, laminates, they're usually cut with a saw. So you got to get down on the ground next to the saw, you start the saw up, it's a big noise, there's a big plume of dust. That's just the way it's been done for years, but this stuff just cuts with a knife, just a utility knife and a straight edge. So you don't even need to crawl over to the saw and make a cut and crawl back again and put your piece in place. You just have your straight edge, your square, your knife, cut, fit, move on to the next one. So all in all, I'm impressed. It works really well. Now notice for a minute too how this particular pattern, wood grain pattern, is intentionally imperfect. What you're seeing here is what rough lumber would look like if it was only partially planed. So you've got these intentional marks left over from the sawing of the lumber. There's a few kind of areas like this. There might be the odd knot that you can see. There's an advantage in that too, if it suits the character of your room. And the advantage is that this kind of flooring does not show dirt nearly as much as a visually perfect piece of clear maple or clear oak or something like that. You've got intentional diversity here, visual diversity, and that just makes the floor look maybe cleaner than it really is. I'm not suggesting that you keep a dirty house, but it can be a pain when every little bit of fluff or debris or a little leaf or something like that that's come into your house shows up. And with this kind of pattern, you don't run into that. Now, that said, not all luxury vinyl has this varied look, so you're going to want to pay attention to that. But now, let's go outside the shop. I'm going to bring a sander with a fresh sanding disc on it, and we're just going to see how the two types of flooring compare in a very high wear, high abrasive situation. So I've got a 6-inch random orbit sander here. I got a fresh 80 grit abrasive, and I'm going to get my cameraman to time out 1 minute as I just hold this in place on this shop finished piece of wood. It's stained, and then 3 coats of the toughest satin urethane I know about. So let's see what it does in terms of so this is simulating the resistance to abrasion that floors are always subjected to. So, okay. Well, do you see a difference? Of course you do. And I'm just holding it up and looking really closely. Now this was, of course, a very challenging test. And if I look closely, I can see a few scuff marks and things. But I mean, that's pretty impressive. Compare the two. Now this, of course, is simulating a lot more wear than you'd ever run into in your house, but it highlights just how tough this is. So as a wood guy, you know, I'm not supposed to like this stuff, but when it comes to floors, I'd rather not be finishing and refinishing them all the time or worrying about them in between. You know, oh, be careful, it's a fragile floor, as all hardwood floors are, in my experience. They are amongst the most fragile of floors, especially when it comes to scratches and things. But as you can see, there's a very authentic looking substitute that's amazingly tough. Join me next time to see a really terrific ATV trailer in action, learn all about wheelchair access ramps, see the fastest chainsaw sharpener in the world in action. It can take a dull chain to razor sharp in less than a minute, plus lots more. Steve Maxwell signing off. Bye for now, and thanks for watching.